Two dump trucks backed across Jack Mercer's lower pasture just after sunrise. Their tires crushed the wet grass. Their warning alarms echoed off the old milking barn. Then both truck beds rose, and 1,000 broken wooden wine crates came crashing down behind his farm. Boards snapped. Rusted nails flashed in the light. Burgundy-stained slats slid into the drainage ditch and piled against the fence. Jack stood beside his tractor without saying a word. At 63, he had spent most of his life repairing what other people threw away. Machines, gates, tools, furniture, even land. But he had never seen anyone dump a mountain this large and call it nothing. Graham Voss climbed down from the lead truck wearing polished boots that had never touched mud before that morning. The winery cleared its old storage building, he said. Split crates, stained crates, crates with missing handles. Useless. Jack looked at the pile, then at the trucks. Who's taking them away? Graham smiled as if Jack had missed the joke. They're on your side of the property line now. He tapped one of the cracked crates with his shoe. Burn them before the county sees them. By the next afternoon, the county had already seen them. The inspector walked the edge of the pile, photographed the blocked ditch, and handed Jack a notice. 30 days. Move the crates, process them, or pay for commercial removal. The estimate was more than $6,000. Jack did not have $6,000. His property taxes were late. The transmission on his feeding tractor was slipping. Cattle prices had dropped again, and the roof over the old milking barn leaked every time the wind pushed rain from the west. The neighbors offered advice. Burn the pile. Haul it into the ravine. Let the winery take him to court. Graham's advice was simpler. Light a match, he said. At least the flames might make this place look useful. Jack waited until everyone left. Then he climbed the pile, pulled out one burgundy-stained board, and bent it slowly between his hands. The end was cracked. The middle was straight. The wood was dry. Before the next harvest ended, the same winery would come back to Jack's farm and buy its own discarded wood at finished furniture prices. But that morning, Jack had 29 days left, and no idea whether even one person would pay for what he saw. If you believe useful things and useful people should never be dismissed too quickly, subscribe to Old Farmer Jack's Stories. Jack carried the board into the old milking barn. The building had not been used as a workshop in nearly 5 years. Dust covered the cast-iron table saw. A belt-driven planer sat beneath a canvas sheet. Hand planes, chisels, and clamps hung exactly where Jack had left them the week his wife, Ellen, died. They had once planned to turn the barn into a furniture shop. Jack had been a cabinet maker before. Farming took all his time. Ellen designed tables and cupboards on graph paper while he worked out how to build them from whatever wood they could afford. She had even chosen the blank wall where finished pieces would be photographed, though they never reached the point of taking a single picture. After she was gone, Jack completed the cattle chores, paid what bills he could, and stopped making anything that was not strictly necessary. He closed the doors and told himself the workshop had belonged to a younger version of him. Now he found her sketchbook beneath a stack of invoices. One page showed a long harvest table made from narrow strips arranged like rows in a field. In the margin, Ellen had written, "Short boards are only useless if the design requires long ones." Jack looked at the stained crate board in his hand. Then he opened both barn doors. Jack began with 12 crates. He pulled each nail by hand. Most came out bent. Some snapped below the surface. He trimmed cracked ends, washed away dried wine residue, and stacked the usable slats beneath the barn's loft fan. The first day produced less wood than he expected. Nearly a third of the pieces were too rotten, too thin, or too badly split to save. The second day was worse. Wine residue stuck to the planer rollers. One board kicked back and struck the wall. The motor groaned whenever Jack fed two slats together. On the third morning, 19-year-old Eli Boone appeared in the doorway. Eli lived on the next farm and had recently quit a warehouse job after his hours were cut. He watched Jack sorting shortboards into piles. "What are you building?" he asked. "A bench." "With those?" "With the parts that aren't broken." Eli lifted one slat. "You could buy better lumber." Jack nodded. "I could also buy a new tractor. Both ideas require money." Eli laughed, but he stayed. Jack showed him how to tap each board and listen for hidden splits. He showed him how to run a magnet over the wood before it reached a blade. He showed him why the deep burgundy pieces needed to be separated from the pale ones. By the end of the week, they had enough material for one seat. Jack laminated the short slats into a thick panel, alternating the colors in a pattern that resembled planted rows. He reinforced the underside with reclaimed oak from a collapsed cattle gate. Mortise and tenon joints connected the legs. No decorative nails. No loose crate corners pretending to be furniture. The bench was heavy, uneven in color, and unlike anything sold in town. Eli ran his hand across the smooth seat. "It doesn't look like garbage." Jack wiped the oil from his fingers. "That's because garbage is usually a judgment made before the work begins." They placed the bench outside Miller's Feed and Seed with a handwritten price tag. $280. By lunchtime, 3 men had tested it. The first said the stain looked dirty. The second said no one would pay for a bench made from wine boxes. The third asked whether it came with free splinters. Graham arrived in a white Winery truck and laughed loud enough for Jack to hear from inside the store. "Splinter furniture," he said. "That's new." Then Lena Ruiz sat down. Lena owned a restored wedding barn and country inn 12 miles outside town. She did not ask where the wood came from. She looked beneath the seat, checked the joints, and pressed both hands against one end. "How much weight will it hold?" Jack carried out 6 50-pound feed sacks. The bench held all 6 without shifting. Lena studied the wine-stained pattern again. "I need 12 tables and 24 benches before the first wedding in May." Eli stopped smiling. Jack asked for the dimensions. Lena wrote them on the back of the price tag. Then she handed Jack a deposit check larger than the farm had earned in the previous 2 months. That evening, Jack stood beside the crate pile and understood the problem had changed. He no longer needed to get rid of the wood. He needed to process it fast enough to keep the first real customer he had received in years. The old milking barn became a production line. Before spending any of Lena's deposit, Jack wrote every required piece on a chalkboard and calculated how many usable slats each one would need. The answer was sobering. The 12 tables and 24 benches would consume hundreds of crates, and the 30-day county deadline was still running. Eli built a dismantling table from sawhorses and scrap steel. Jack mounted magnets beneath it to catch broken nails. They installed washing racks along the south wall and drying shelves beneath the loft fan. Every crate passed through the same steps: dismantle, inspect, trim, wash, dry, sort, plane, laminate. The usable boards went into bins marked by thickness and color. Rotten pieces went to the burn pile. Clean offcuts heated the workshop stove. Jack taught Eli that speed did not come from rushing. It came from arranging the work so the same mistake did not have to be corrected twice. The planer began making a sharp knocking sound during the second week. Eli reached for the switch. Jack stopped him. "Listen first." He placed 2 fingers against the motor housing, then loosened the belt and turned the pulley by hand. "Bearing. You can hear that. You can feel it before you hear it. Machines complain quietly before they break loudly. They replaced the Baron with one salvaged from an old grain cleaner and finished the first table 3 days later. The tabletop was built from hundreds of narrow wine-stained slats arranged in a herringbone pattern. A reclaimed oak frame carried the weight. Jack sealed the surface with durable food-safe oil and burned a small mark beneath it, Mercer Farm Works. By the time the 12 tables arrived at Lena's wedding barn, the original crate pile had fallen by only a few feet. But the workshop looked alive. Fresh boards filled the racks. Clamps covered the benches. Ellen's sketchbook stayed open beside Jack's measuring tools. At the first wedding, guests photographed the tables before the bride arrived. The deep burgundy marks that Graham had called stains looked like deliberate bands of color beneath the warm finish. The harvest row pattern repeated from table to table, but no two surfaces were identical. Lena placed a small card near the entrance explaining that the furniture had been made from discarded winery crates and reclaimed farm timber. A restaurant owner asked who built them. Then a tasting room manager asked for 2 bar cabinets. A country inn wanted 8 dining tables. A farmhouse owner placed an order for a harvest table long enough to seat 14. Would you have burned those crates or saved them? Tell us what you would have built from the wood Jack found. Orders changed the rhythm of the farm. Jack fed cattle before sunrise, worked in the shop until noon, repaired equipment in the afternoon, and returned to the barn after supper. Eli created a simple order book and photographed every finished piece against the barn's north wall. He recorded dimensions, deposits, delivery dates, and the number of crate boards used. For the first time, Jack knew exactly what one pile of discarded wood could become. A standard bench used 48 usable slats. A 6-foot table used nearly 200. A bar cabinet used more than 300. Plus reclaimed frame lumber. The numbers mattered because the pile was not endless. Neither was Jack's strength. When a regional farm-to-table restaurant group requested 40 tables and matching service cabinets, Jack almost refused. The contract was worth enough to push annual sales beyond $100,000. It also required commercial load testing, documented moisture levels, consistent dimensions, and delivery within 8 weeks. Graham heard about the proposal. He called the restaurant's purchasing manager and warned him that Jack was using unstable packaging wood. Crates are made to carry bottles, Graham said, not customers. The buyer paused the contract until Jack could provide a tested sample and written production records. Eli was furious. Jack was not. Being insulted doesn't weaken the table, he said, but failing the test would. They built a prototype. Jack reinforced the frame, measured every joint, and recorded the moisture content of each laminated panel. Eli photographed the process and created a file for the buyer. They marked every board batch so a problem could be traced back to the day it had been cleaned and dried. For Jack, that paperwork felt almost harder than the joinery. He had spent his life trusting his hands and his eye. But if Mercer Farm Works was going to become more than a man in a barn, the work had to be repeatable by someone besides him. Then the old planer stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The main Baron locked while a wide tabletop panel was passing through. The belt burned against the pulley. The motor smoked and the panel twisted hard enough to tear 3 glue joints apart. Jack killed the power. Outside, thunder rolled over the pasture. Rain struck the leaking west roof before they could cover the sorted boards. Water ran across the floor and soaked 2 full racks of prepared slats. Eli stared at the dead machine and ruined wood. We should return the deposit. Jack did not answer. The replacement motor cost more than they had available. A new planer would take weeks to arrive. The restaurant's deadline would not move. That night, Jack sat alone at the workbench. Ellen's sketchbook lay open beneath the hanging lamp. On the same page as the harvest table, she had drawn a small cabinet made from replaceable panels. Beside it, she had written, "Build for the flaw you know will come." Jack looked at the ruined tabletop. They had built one large panel. When part of it failed, everything failed. The next morning, Jack cut the damaged panel into sections. He redesigned the tabletop as 6 smaller reinforced panels fitted into one heavy frame. If one section warped or cracked, it could be removed without destroying the whole table. Then he turned to the planer. The motor was burned, but the cast iron body was still sound. Behind the barn sat an abandoned grain auger with a working electric motor. Its shaft turned in the wrong direction and the pulley did not match. Jack removed the motor, machined a sleeve from an old tractor bushing, fitted new bearings, and aligned a salvaged pulley with the planer's belt. Eli rebuilt the guard and installed a shutoff cable within reach of the operator. The machine vibrated badly on the first test. Jack adjusted the mount by the thickness of a washer. On the second test, it ran smoothly. They worked for 19 straight days. Eli repaired the roof between glue cycles. Jack built a load testing frame from steel fence posts and an old hydraulic jack. Every finished table was measured, photographed, and tested beyond the restaurant's requirement. The prototype held more than twice the specified load. The buyer reinstated the contract. Stories like Jack's remind us that experience does not expire. Share this with someone whose old skills still matter. The 40 tables left Mercer Farmworks in 3 rented trailers. Each one carried the same wine-stained pattern, the same reinforced frame, and the same small mark burned beneath the surface. When the restaurant group opened its first location, the owner placed a card on every table explaining that the wood had once been discarded behind a cattle farm. Customers began asking whether they could buy similar pieces for their homes. The waiting list grew from 4 weeks to 3 months. Jack hired 2 local workers to dismantle and prepare crates. Eli became a paid apprentice and learned to build complete benches without supervision. Within 18 months, Mercer Farmworks recorded $128,000 in gross sales. Not profit, not sudden wealth. Sales earned 1 table, 1 bench, and 1 repaired machine at a time. Jack paid the overdue property taxes. He rebuilt the tractor transmission. He replaced the barn roof. Most importantly, he kept the workshop doors open. The crate mountain shrank until only a few hundred remained. By then, people who once laughed at the bench were asking how far behind Jack was on orders. Graham returned in early autumn. Red Hollow Winery was renovating its tasting room. The designer wanted long communal tables, display cabinets, and benches with visible wine-stained grain. Graham stood inside the workshop looking at finished pieces stacked for delivery. "We'd like to use our original crates," he said. "It would make a good story for customers." Jack nodded. Graham smiled. "Since the material came from us, I assume there'll be a discount." Jack opened Eli's order book and placed a written quote on the workbench. Full commercial price. Delivery charges. Deposit required. No free material deduction. At the bottom, Jack added 1 condition. All future crates had to be sorted, kept dry, and delivered to the proper side of the property line. Graham read the figure twice. "That's a lot for wood we gave you." Jack looked toward the pile outside. "You didn't give me furniture." Graham signed. The final winery order used the last burgundy-stained crates from the original dump. Jack arranged the slats in long harvest row patterns based on Ellen's sketch. When the tasting room reopened, Graham introduced the tables as handcrafted reclaimed pieces from the winery's own history. He did not mention that he had once told Jack to burn them. Jack did not need him to. The invoices were paid. The workshop was full. Eli was teaching a new employee how to listen for a bad bearing before it failed. And beneath Ellen's sketchbook sat the first bench Jack had built from 12 broken crates. He never sold it. The winery had dumped 1,000 wine crates behind Jack Mercer's farm. What they had really left him was the unfinished future he had almost stopped believing in. Subscribe to Old Farmer Jack Stories for more stories about old machines, hard harvests, and the people who still know how to build something worth keeping.